we're at Fort Orange. Yeah.
So
Oh, here we are. Pardon me.
we're going to now welcome Betsy Rosenbluth, whose name tag says Shelburne Farms, but is here today as the project director of Vermont Feed and part of the Vermont Farm to School Network. We've got a number of folks who are coming in and testifying over the next couple of hours as part of Farm to School Awareness Day. So welcome. Good morning.
Good morning.
Why don't we do a quick round of introductions, and then we'll let you jump in, and then you've got others who I think you're going to help coordinate. And I'll start. I'm David Durfee. I'm chair of the committee and represent the towns of Shaftesbury and Glastonbury and Sunderland in Bennington County.
Rodney Graham, Orange 3, Williamstown, Chelsea.
Jed Lipsky, Memorial 1, Stowe.
Henry Pearl, I represent the towns of Danville, Peacham, and Cabot.
Charles Wilson, I represent Caledonia 3, Lyndonville, Sheffield, Wheelock, Newark.
I'm David Templeman. I represent Orleans Village, Brownington, Barton, and Westmore.
Right, so the village made it today.
I have that sometimes.
Josie Levitt, Grand Isle Chittenden, which is all of Grand Isle County and part of West Milton.
Mike Rice, Bennington Rutland District, Danby, Dorset, Landgrove, Mount Tabor, and Peru.
Great.
Hi, Betsy. John O'Brien, Windsor Orange 1, Tunbridge and Road.
Hi, Esme Cole, Windsor 6, Hartford.
Heather Supernaut, Vice Chair, Windsor 4, Barnard, Pomfret, and Bridgewater.
Right.
And Laura Rich is our committee assistant in the corner who's helped coordinate things today.
Thank you.
So I think what we'll do, my understanding is each of the witnesses has roughly 10 minutes of testimony. So we'll let you, and nothing to look at on the screen. So
Yeah, there's one slide that we might, well, actually I have a handout. So, okay. Yeah, we have handouts but we've also submitted them so that you can have them electronically.
Good, thank you. And we'll let you go through your remarks, and then if committee members want to jot down questions, we'll try to save questions for the end of each witness's testimony. Could you just tell us who else is here right now? I know people will be coming in and out, but can you just
Sure.
introduce the other folks around the...
Sure. We have about 8 speakers, most of whom are still in Senate Ag, but Gina Clitheroe is here with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. See on Zoom. Ashley Fioretti is a farmer in Middletown Springs. And Connor Floyd with the Agency of Education is on Zoom downstairs. He'll hopefully pop on shortly. We've got Jim Birmingham, who is the school nutrition director of the Mount Montpelier School District. 2 of the state's food hubs. So Becca Perrin is with Green Mountain Farm to School, Green Mountain Farm Direct. And Tom Bruton is with Food Connects down in, they cover a lot of especially the southern part of the state. And then Helen Rortvet with NOFA Vermont will wrap things up. And we also have a few folks with us in case questions come up. So Elise Parambo is with Green Mountain Farm to School. And there's probably a few more folks downstairs, but that's who is speaking today. All right. Well, thank you so much for having us. As the chair mentioned, it's Farm to School and Early Childhood Day in the legislature. Usually we have a parade of students telling you themselves the impact of Farm to School and bringing you tasty taste tests of things they've baked and made. But it was much too complicated this year to do that. So stay tuned for next year. We do have some students this afternoon who are able to make it though. For the record, my name is Betsy Rosenbluth. I'm the project director of Vermont Feed, which is a farm to school partnership of Shelburne Farms and NOFA Vermont. And we're going to focus today on the impact of farm to school in early childhood here in Vermont on our students, on our farmers, and on our communities. And we speak to it about the win-win-win of farm to school. We're feeding kids, they're learning about where that food comes from, what it does for them and their communities, and we're benefiting farmers in that process. We're asking you to support the Farm to School and Early Childhood Program with a level funded base appropriation of $500,000 for fiscal year 2024, and to support the Local Foods Initiative program at $500,000 in base funding. So Vermont led the nation back in 2007 when we passed the Roseau-McLaughlin Farm to School program. We were the first state to have a farm to school grants program that provided both technical assistance and grants to schools. So they had the support to start to change their school food system. Since then, over 200 grants have gone to schools and early childhood programs, and you'll hear from the Agency of Agriculture that administers that program more of the details of what's been happening. We've also continued to be national leaders in Farm to School when we expanded the grants program to early childhood providers. So if you think about 90% of our brains are developed by the time we're 5 years old. And so nutrition is absolutely critical for healthy brain development. And in Vermont, at least until, I don't know if this is the most recent figure, but 70% of our kids were cared for outside of the home. So nutrition security and good nutrition in early childhood settings is really key. So we've been making a lot of headway with that as well, part of the grants program and in part of the technical assistance that we provide. Vermont passed the local foods incentive a couple of years ago that supports increasing local purchasing. Schools right now, the most recent figures I have, are spending over $20 million on food every year. So our goal with the local foods incentive is to keep more of those dollars in the Vermont economy and with Vermont farmers. And so we'll be able to let you know how that is going. Connor Floyd with the Agency of Education administers that grant program and can talk about that as well. But think about $20 million. If we even met the goal, which is in the legislation of 20% Vermont foods, it's a significant amount of money. And I think as farmers ramp up for the school market, they're also ramping up for wholesale or institutional sales. We know also from a UVM study that every dollar that schools spend on purchasing local foods contributes an additional 60 cents to the Vermont economy. And in our last census that we did, over 100 farms in Vermont were selling to schools and early childhood programs.
Sure, can I ask a question?
Yes.
About that specific 100 farms. Do you have a breakdown by county of that farm participation?
I can show you a map of where they are.
Yeah, map would be great.
And a list of the farms.
Oh, that'd be perfect,
So
yes.
let me get that back to you.
Thank you.
Can I just
Sure.
quick clarifying? No, it's not.
Yes.
I just wanted to, when you talk about early childhood, is it synonymous with pre-K?
It's all of it. I mean, pre-K in the public school is often, I mean, it depends how the program works, but often those kids are part of the school meal program in that school. But in terms of some of the workshops and technical assistance and connections that we're making, we see everything from very small home-based programs to some of the larger centers and Head Start and pre-K from the schools. And then the third leg of this stool, which you're very familiar with, is universal school meals. So we have the local foods incentive, we have the farm to school and early childhood grants, and universal meals. And that is to really ensure equitable access to school meals for every student in every zip code in our state, funded off the top of the education fund. And, you know, for many students, around half their daily calories come from school meals. So we know it's essential for the students' health, for their learning, and for their success to be able to access those nourishing meals. And I think Vermont is a little bit unique in how well integrated food access, local food, and food education is. It's all, you can't do one without the other. It's that combination that is changing that system and making sure that every child grows up with that connection to local food and has access to eating it. So the three programs work together. And when that happens, as you know, we're feeding kids and we're supporting families. You know, it's breakfast, it's lunch, sometimes after school dinner or after school snack, summer meals, and at the same time benefiting our local farmers. You know, I'm going to tell one very brief story for me that just shows the kind of change we're seeing in Vermont. So I was speaking with the staff of Sodexo up at UVM that run the meal program, and they were saying the Vermont kids that are growing up through Vermont schools with Farm to School, when they get to UVM, they're asking for fresh and local food. Like they can see that that is staying with those kids. And that to me is that testament to how this is building lifelong healthy eating habits and a connection to Vermont foods. So this graphic, you might have seen, but I'm going to hand it around. We call the virtuous cycle. Here, maybe split it. No. And it's just a quick way of seeing, our goal has been farm fresh school meals for all. How do we do those three pieces? And Universal Meals and Farm to School is increasing participation in school meals, which is giving more revenue to those programs. So they're able to buy more local food, which gets the kids more connected and excited. They're eating more, participation goes up, et cetera. It's this positive reinforcing cycle. And it leads to more purchasing and more participation and more of that good Vermont fresh food going in kids' bellies. So I'm going to stop there and just say you're going to hear today from farmers, school nutrition directors, food hubs, some of the technical assistance providers, how Farm to School has made a difference. As you mentioned, Chair, we can take questions after each speaker, and we should have time for discussion at the end. And all of the handouts are with staff and available. And we're, again, looking for your support of full funding for both the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grants Program at $500,000 base funding and the local food incentive at $500,000 base funding.
Questions?
Just, so what were last year's appropriations for those two?
Those same amounts. So, yeah. And you'll hear a little bit how we've been able to take advantage of that increased funding with the grants program in particular.
It wasn't base, it was just considered one time?
I believe the grants program was base funding, and this year it's level base funding because it was the same as last year. The local purchasing incentive, I'm not sure if it's in the governor's proposed budget this year. I just don't know. And whether it was one time. Yeah, we're not sure if it was one time, but making that base funding would be, so especially so farmers and school nutrition can anticipate and count on that if they're going to be changing their systems and their buying relationships.
Would you know whether that $500,000 was fully utilized or have, and if so, have a sense of how much demand wasn't able to be met?
Yeah. So we have a couple of speakers that'll follow me that can talk in detail about that. So the first year of the program, the way the program works is there's an on-ramp to get schools ready in the first year. They're putting systems in place. And then in the second year, they're qualifying for either a 15%, 15-cent incentive per lunch, 20 and 25. In the first year, we were almost exactly at 500,000 in that first ramp up. This past year, schools came a little below that, and you're going to hear why. And I would just, happy to talk more, but we're trying to change the food system, both on the supply side, how food is, getting to schools, and changing some of the systems in place with school nutrition. And it's going to take more than a year to get those in place. But we're very confident, given the incredible positive response from school nutrition directors. They want to qualify. Some came like 14%. You're going to hear from Jim Birmingham in Montpelier. He's at 14%, a number of them. So they're getting close. They're working on it. We're anticipating that will just grow. And that's why we feel like holding that amount. Hopefully in the future, schools just continue that local purchasing.
Representative Lipsky.
We had some great testimony about 2 weeks ago, and there was a nutritionist from the Bellows Falls, maybe Rockingham district, and he'd hit a number like it was maybe 27%, and he brought up a good point. Getting farm fresh eggs from Vermont was not possible, but 7 miles across in Alstead, New Hampshire, somewhere.
Right.
Couldn't get them, but they had them by the.
Yeah.
So that was just a quirky technicality, but as far as the carbon footprint of bringing a month's supply of eggs.
Right.
From 7 miles away would have.
Yeah.
Smart. Anyway.
No, you're raising, we're learning a lot, having this program in place. You're probably talking about Harley Sterling, who's above 25%, which is awesome. And you can hear a little bit more. Schools are buying now ground beef and, not just fruits and vegetables, which are great, but proteins like beef, beans. There's a project going with Vermont Beans, dairy, a range of products. I am part of a Northeast Farm to School coalition, and as other states are looking to also put in place a purchasing incentive, that conversation's coming up. Like, could we, if we're within a close distance across the border, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, would that ever qualify as local if those states with their purchasing incentive would buy from Vermont farmers? So I think there's some conversation down the road. Does New England want to look at it more regionally? We're not ready yet, but we'll get there, I think, eventually.
Representative Cole.
I'm curious about approaching the schools who have not yet taken advantage of these programs and how we can sort of support them in transitioning and maybe identifying what is holding them back.
Yeah. Yes, excellent. Vermont Feed and our staff at NOFA Vermont in particular have reached out to every single school food authority to see what support do they need, what systems do they need to be put in place to support them to access. So you'll hear from Helen Wortvet a little bit later this morning about what some of the challenges are and how we're trying to work around those. Some of them, I think, are a question of time to work through. We've got to figure out contracting with those schools that use a food service management company, and we'll figure it out. It's going to take more time. Some other schools need more time to put some systems in place for that purchasing, and we're working with them on that as well. And I think the beauty of the farm to school and grants is that it's helping build a school-wide program where there's support for the school nutrition staff across the school and with the community. And that's helping, I think, to start to make some of those shifts.
Representative Rice.
I Don't expect you to know this off the top of your head, but it would be, I think, helpful to understand across the state sort of what percentage of school districts are doing those food service contracts with outside purveyors and who's doing it in-house, and then how that translates to which ones are having more success.
Yeah.
Bringing the percentages up and which aren't.
Yeah, we do have some of that, excuse me, that information. I'll make a note and have Helen address it this morning, and then we can follow up as well. Yeah.
I'm wondering also whether somebody this morning can tell us in little detail what a school meal needs to look like or consist of by federal requirements. And I know there may be some flexibility there, but just having a better understanding about that.
Yeah.
You mentioned, somebody mentioned calories and getting half of the calories and from school meals. How does that translate, nutritionally as well? Since,
Right.
Some calories are different than others.
Okay, we brought you today a little booklet that's called How Do We Feed Vermont's Children? That lays that out. It's downstairs, but it's coming up. So,
Great.
we anticipate being able to give you not too much information. You also will have Connor Floyd with the Agency of Education on Zoom in a moment, and he can really answer some of those questions as well. He's in the nutrition program.
All right, well, why don't we shift then to the next witness?
Okay, so you're going to hear next from Gina Clitheroe, who's with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and Gina's here.
Matters, but that's my CSA one.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gina Clitheroe with the Agency of Agriculture. I have some handouts, so I'm not sure if you'd be able to help me pass this around. So I'm passing around the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grant Program Impact Report wrapping up fiscal year 2022. So my role at the agency is Farm to Institution Program Manager. So these are the grants programs that I manage. And as Betsy mentioned, the grants program at the Agency of Agriculture started in 2007 and has been offering grants to early educators, schools, school districts, and nonprofits on an annual basis since then. Since 2007, we've supported over 200 grants through this program and invested over $1.6 billion in state funds. So these grants really focus on supporting the development of farm to school and early childhood programming across the 3 C's, what we call the 3 C's of farm to school, which, as Betsy touched on, were the classroom, cafeteria, and in the community. I really focus on connecting kids with where their food comes from, the land, and the people that produce it. So the agency administers 3 grant programs within this larger program. The first is the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grant, which is kind of the flagship funding opportunity. It's been around for many years. And then we have 2 newer programs that started in 2021, and that's the Community Supported Agriculture Grant and the Vision Grant. So the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grant, like I said, program's flagship funding opportunity, offers grants of around $10,000 to each school. In 2022, we supported 7 school districts and early child care centers with those funds. What's great about this grant, it's a capacity building grant focused on building up sustainable and holistic programs that last after the grant period. So this financial assistance also comes with a technical assistance component and investment from the state. So folks receive expertise one-on-one with each grantee in the areas of local procurement, meal program viability, school gardens, and farm to school curriculum. And those are with our partners from Shelburne Farms, NOFA, Hunger Free Vermont, and the Vermont Garden Network. And then grantees are also supported with a coach who works one-on-one with each grantee to support them in planning and implementing their projects. And we've heard from grantees year over year that the coaches have been hugely supportive in helping them implement their projects. So it's really this proven model of combining money with mentorship and expertise to support sustainable programming in the long term. The second grant program is the Community Supported Agriculture Grant, or the CSA grant. Like I said, started in 2021. And this grant, the average award is much smaller. It's only $810 per recipient. But the impact has been really profound. There's a direct, tangible impact from these funds. The grant program provides a reimbursement for the cost of 80% of buying a CSA or a farm share. And that grant program is specifically open for early child care providers and after-school programs. And it's turned out to be a grant that is really uniquely suited for these smaller programs with only maybe 1 or 2 staff, especially for home care providers, to get into the system of working in the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grants program. Last year, we supported 28 grants through that program. And relationships are being built between early care providers and after-school programs and nearby farms that are lasting beyond the grant period. The third grant program that we offer is the Vision Grant. And the Vision Grant is really for outside-the-box innovative solutions for problems facing agriculture and our broader community. So some of those projects focus on climate change, or they could focus on food security. Last year, we supported 1 grant through that program, and that went to Fairfield Community Association. You'll see a little spotlight on them at the back of the report. $16,000 focused on food sovereignty and connecting students who are, in their schools with local farmers and also local farm workers. So that's a really exciting effort there. And I will just say, in fiscal year 2022, because that's the one that's the most recent completed cycle that we can look at, $190,000 was invested across these 3 grant programs. The legislature, as Betsy mentioned, and Governor Scott passed $500,000 allocated to this program for fiscal year 2023, and we're still moving through that funding now, so we don't have a full summary of how that's been spent. So within the 3 grant programs, the first one, that one opened in the fall, decisions have been made. We know already the impact there, but we still have 2 grant programs, the CSA grant and the Vision Grant, coming up this spring. One opening this month, the next opening in March. But we've already seen really unprecedented investment and impact from just that first of the 3 grant programs in the in the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grant. We supported twice the number of grantees than we were able to support last year because of the increase in base funding. And so 14 grants went out instead of 7 this year. And 9 of those 14 are early childcare providers. And what's really exciting about this investment in farm to early childhood as well is several of these grants have been applications were presented by networks of early child care centers. So even though we only put out 14 grants, there were actually 42 early child care centers that have been engaged in these applications and will see a direct benefit as a result of those grants. And we still have these 2 grant programs yet to come. We anticipate awarding 60 mini grants for the CSA program this year, which is over twice what we were able to offer last year. And that was a highly sought after grant program. And then we are increasing the Vision Grant budget from $16,000 last year to $150,000 this year. So that's going to be really exciting, looking to support, instead of 1, multiple high impact projects that can be replicated and scaled and present some outside the box solutions to farm to school challenges. So that is the bulk of what I have to offer today. I think one thing that I just want to mention too is that the Agency of Agriculture Grants program really works in partnership with the Local Foods Incentive Grant. The Local Foods Incentive Grant is really focused on local procurement and support in the cafeteria, and our grant program is great for that. And we also focus on farm to school in the classroom, farm to school in the community, so connecting farmers with educators, families, students, and also bringing farm to school into the class curriculum and supporting kids' education on the environment and food systems.
Representative Levitt?
Just a really quick question, more to help my local farmers. Has the deadline for applying for the CSA grant passed?
It has not. It hasn't even opened yet.
Oh, great. Okay. It opens in March.
It opens in February and the
Okay.
vision grant opens in March.
Got it. Okay. I will pass that along to them. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Those would be for next school year then? Or would the grant money be awarded before the end of this fiscal year?
So the CSA grants are tailored towards early care providers and after-school programs, and a lot of those are operating through the summer. So that's often to pay for the cost of a summer share or a spring to summer share.
Okay. Representative Rice?
I can't help but notice the divide in number of projects, north to south, and just wondering about what the outreach looks like, how you're informing about the opportunities that are available, how you might be reaching out to counties that seem to be underserved through these grant programs, and then also if there's any concern about, what the actual process looks like, and if there's any concern about capacity of organizations or schools or farmers to apply for these.
Yeah, those are great questions. In terms of outreach, you'll note that when you look at the blue dots show historic grants. So even though there might have been less grants, especially for the CSA grant program in Southern Vermont last year, you can see that there have been funds allocated to all counties. And to your point about how outreach is done, a lot of our outreach is through, we reach out to the Farm to School network through listserv, and then the agency has an email newsletter that we put out that has, I think it's up to like 5,000 subscribers. So that's the primary avenues. We also post on our social media accounts, but we also lean on partners to spread the word. So there are a lot of folks that you'll hear today who work with organizations that might be located geographically throughout Vermont. You have Farm to School, Green Mountain Farm to School up in Northern Vermont, and Food Connects in Southern Vermont, and they can help spread the word in their region to schools that are in their network. So we do rely on them as well. And if you have more advice about how we can improve our outreach efforts to folks in your district, please do let us know. It's something that the Agency of Agriculture has really been focusing on. Happy to continue to make improvements in that area. And you had asked as well about capacity for implementing these grants. And we definitely see that being a limitation, especially with the flagship funding opportunity, the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grant. That's like I said, it's a capacity building grant. You need a lot of folks to be on a team to implement that. There's typically people who are farmers, there's educators, students, administrators. So that one does require significant capacity to implement. And one of the values is the technical assistance support can really help move a school along from point A to point B when there are other priorities that come up. What's great about the CSA grant program is that it has a lower access barrier. It's a much more straightforward application process, straightforward reporting. It's really just as simple as we're directly reimbursing the cost of buying food. So that's an effort that we see being more accessible, less paperwork, but we are always trying to make all of our grant programs easier to access over time.
Representative Templeman?
I'm curious about what the qualifiers are to receive the grant.
So what the evaluation criteria looks like. So in the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grant Program, it's a combination of like what's going to be the anticipated impact, what's the level of engagement across stakeholders. So is there a robust team that's ready to implement a project? What sorts of other, basically, where is there going to be high impact in terms of numbers, and then some existing structure that we know that with some investment, this team can really take off and implement a clear project. And then there's other conditions that are kind of standard for grant evaluation, like is it clear what they want to do? Does it seem like they have the expertise to implement that project? So there are a few criteria, and then decisions are made based on a review process that involves folks within the Agency of Agriculture and external stakeholders to review applications. And we try to assign folks who have expertise within the K-12 setting to K-12 applications, and folks that have expertise within the early educator space to early educator applications.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm wondering, does the agency or somebody have the capacity to follow up down the road several years after a grant has been made to see whether that capacity, how much capacity was actually built and whether it's maintained?
Yeah, that's a great question, to the point of like what the evaluation of the program. And all grantees submit final reports, so we get kind of at the very end, but that snapshot years down the road, I don't have access to that information. But I do know that the way that the network of support within the Farm to School and Early Childhood Network is there, and there are folks that will engage with the grants program, and then they'll end up kind of cropping up in other areas down the line, or vice versa. So there's a lot of overlap between schools that participate in the New England Farm to School Institute, for example, which is a program that Vermont Feed, Shelburne Farms, Betsy, and folks at NOFA host. There's overlap between that program and folks that previously received grants. And then we've also seen a lot of overlap between folks that have previously received Agency of Ag grants and folks that hit up above that 15% threshold for the local foods incentive grant and are now in that program as well. But I think that's a really good question about kind of that long-term look back. And I'm fairly new to the position, so I don't have that historical context, but there might be more anecdotes that, Betsy would be able to share about that, or others.
Okay, good. Well, we'll thank you.
Yeah.
If there any other questions, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So next, we're going to hear from a farmer in Middletown Springs, Ashley Fioretti. She's on Zoom. And I believe, Laura, you also probably got a link that we can maybe turn to after Ashley that shows a map of all the farms across the state selling to schools. So we can bring that up after. So Ashley, if you want to introduce yourself, we're just getting going.
All right, good morning. Thanks for having me here today and for taking time to hear what I have to share. My name is Ashley Fioretti, and I do live in Middletown Springs, Vermont, where I'm the owner operator of Little Flower Farm, which is a small diversified farm where we raise eggs, produce, and we make maple syrup here. I also have the pleasure of teaching at both Middletown Springs Elementary School and the Wells Village School. And I'm a part of the Wells Springs District Farm to School team because we were fortunate enough to receive one of the Farm to School early childhood grants last year. I too am asking that you please support the Farm to School and Early Childhood program with a level funded base appropriation of $500,000 for fiscal year 2024, and that you also support the Local Purchasing Initiative program for schools at $500,000 base funding. These programs are important to me, not only because my children attend Vermont schools, but because food, everything from eating it to growing it, and food education are passions of mine, and they have been since I was a teenager. I think the experience, to be able to experience local foods in a tangible way for students is invaluable. And the ability for me to grow food that is served in our local school is one of the most fulfilling aspects of my life as a farmer. Without these programs, I definitely think it would be harder for this type of education and nutrition to take place, and for my farm and other local farms to make a stronger connection with our school community. Through our Farm to School grant, I get to continue the work of our school garden program and the educational experiences that students have in that garden. The pure joy and excitement that I witnessed through watching students get their hands in the soil to plant seeds or starts, and then to watch them harvest those food once grown and consume in the cafeteria to share with them, with their friends, it's really quite special. For students that don't have the opportunity to grow food at their home or haven't been exposed to growing food before, these experiences are really life-changing. And I've been able to witness students making that connection between where and how food grows to then feeding themselves and others. Through our grant, I'm also able to teach in both the Middletown Springs Elementary School and Wells Village School. Once a month, I go in utilizing the Harvest of the Month resource and then the mobile kitchens that our grant money helped us to assemble. So I get to work with pre-K through 6th grade at both schools. And it's really nice to be able to let the kids know, hey, this food that we're about to explore with our 5 senses was either grown on my farm or a farm right down the road from one of the schools that we're working with or another local farm in Vermont. So that they can feel that connection of, hey, it's right from here. Let's see. I enjoy making the connection with students between the food and then their math classes or their English class or literature or science, social studies, math and art, because I think it's really great for students to experience their food beyond what's on the plate. I love traveling the globe with students so that they can see, where the food originated from, how it ended up here in Vermont, and to know that there are people all over the world that are eating that same food so that they're able to make a connection that, food is a connector of all of us, not just locally, but globally. Cooking with students has been really fun. They're always so excited. What are we going to make this time? What food did you bring for us to prepare? And they all genuinely have fun preparing the food, which for me on a sneaky level is like, haha, they don't necessarily know they're learning a life skill, but look, they are, and they're having fun doing it. And I can't really describe how great it feels to have students try a food for the first time, especially if they were like, I don't like that food, I'm not going to eat that. Even if they're just licking it and they don't like it, the bravery around trying something new, and solely because they have so much pride in knowing that they helped fix that food that we're about to eat. The bonus for me is when a student asks after class, especially one of those that are like, I'm not eating that, they ask for the recipe, or a parent comes up to me at a basketball game or something and says, that they really enjoyed recreating that recipe with their family. It's not every day you get to hear that about kale chips. It's important because I think that, knowing that food doesn't just come out of a grocery store, knowing how to grow it, harvest it, process it, knowing why those foods are really important for our bodies, connecting students to the local community and the global community. I just think that those aspects of learning are so very important and so vital. I'm very grateful that our school district was able to receive a farm to school grant, and I really hope this program is funded so that we can keep it going throughout the state. And then finally, I'll say that I'm lucky enough to send my children, or my youngest son, my daughter's in a different school now, but that they prepare food in-house in the cafeteria. And through these programs, our local food, or our school nutrition person is able to purchase more local foods that then she incorporates into the meals that the students are eating. And she does it either in an existing menu item or a new menu item. And we're also lucky that she's very creative and adventurous, so that it allows the students to also be more adventurous when they're dining, which I think just helps, with lifelong eating. So again, I'm asking that you'll support these programs again. And I appreciate you taking time to hear what I have to say. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Ashley. Does the committee have any questions? I'm wondering if you can tell us some of the things anyway that you grow at your farm that you bring to introduce the students to.
So far this year, we have done winter squash that was grown here. The sweet dumplings were the favorite amongst the students. What else have we done? We did, well, that's right. My son actually just came down the stairs. He's homesick from school today. He's like, we did cabbage. Using purple cabbage juice that then you put a lime dressing on, and it makes them go from this beautiful purple color to pinks and blues. So that was really fun. We just did sweet potatoes. I don't grow those. Yeah, you're throwing. So those are the ones that are coming to mind right away. Last year we did peppers, we did kale. We're getting ready to venture into the world of beets. So those are just a few. Oh, we did popcorn last year too. So whole grains, or we ground up dent corn to make cornbread and then grew popcorn in the school garden. And we did maple syrup last year that I was able to provide from my farm.
Representative Rice has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. It's exciting to hear about the connections that you're making between food and other areas of study. And I just wonder if you could talk about that a little bit more, how you're making those connections between food and math, science, English, history, whatever.
Yeah, so depending on the lesson we choose, we might dive into the part of the plant, and then that gets us into the science of how, maybe water and nutrients from the soil are transported up into the leaves and into the flowers, and then how those sugars from the flowers go down into those storage roots that we might be eating. So that's one way. With maple syrup, we talked about how, the spring, the change in the weather is kind of waking up the sap in the soil. So that was a bit of a science. The art is so fun just to have them just draw pictures. With beets, I think we're actually going to venture in the world of making some paint with the beets. I'll let you know how that goes. That's an experiment. In the past, we've done, we dyed fabrics with beets. This was years ago. And then let's see, with literature, the winter squash was so great because there's a liberation story about the Haitian liberation. And the book was called Freedom Soup. And so we were able to talk about, how Haitians were able to liberate themselves from slavery, and their celebration with this soup that they had to prepare for hundreds of years for slave masters that they weren't ever allowed to taste. And so students were able to hear about how this was a celebration, and we were able to connect. It was around Thanksgiving time. So, are there other celebrations in your home? Is there a food that you prepare every time to try to draw a connection between food and celebrating? What other ones? Math, they've counted seeds. We've done, the difference between storing sweet potatoes and harvesting sweet potatoes to cure. I love doing the map around the globe, to highlight, this is where it came from, and then it traveled to here, and through breeding. Now we've got, orange carrots instead of the purple ones that originated in Afghanistan. And so it depends on what the food is, which one of those lessons I choose to dive most into. But we always travel the globe, and there typically is a little bit of science because I'm a little geek about that. And art and music. I try to read books with the kids, that are mostly picture books, but connect in a fun way to the food that we're talking about.
And just to follow up, are all of these amazing lessons that you're sharing with the students in these schools curriculum that is available to others? Are these things that could be shared and spread across the state?
Yes, definitely. So all of the inspiration that I get and most of the lesson comes from the Harvest of the Month program, which is easily accessible online. I have delved into other states too. Like last year, we went into New York for potatoes. And I know that these lessons they're being revamped to have a more social justice sort of lens on them, which was great to do that the Haitian liberation story, to have something that was totally not what we're familiar with here. So yeah, the Harvest of the Month is an incredible resource. And then before children, I was an agriculture educator for 10 years. So I pull on my past experiences to supplement those already awesome lessons that Harvest of the Month provides.
Great. Well, Ashley, thank you very much for being here with us this morning, remotely here.
Thank
and,
you.
We'll stay in touch, and I think we'll move on then.
Yeah. I don't know, Laura, if you want to show that map or.
It's on the webpage.
Okay, on the webpage. All right, great. So next we have Connor Floyd. And you can introduce yourself, Connor. And there were some questions earlier while you were downstairs about school nutrition programs?
Yep, I've got those.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Betsy. Hi there, for the record, my name is Connor Floyd. I'm the grant program manager on the child nutrition programs team at the Agency of Education. So I operate all the child nutrition grants, work on farm to school initiatives, also do food service management company oversight and some fiscal oversight of our programs. And so, yeah, I'll start by addressing some of those earlier questions before diving into the specifics of the local foods incentive, which is what I'm here to testify about. So one question was about which school food authorities are run by food service management companies or contract with, I should say, food service management companies. And so we have 50 eligible school food authorities that could apply for the local foods incentive. And of those 50, 22 contract with a food service management company. That doesn't mean that every school in that school food authority is managed by a food service management company. It just means at least some are. It's kind of a mix of what that actual breakdown looks like. So, you know, just under half have some kind of involvement with a food service management company. That has been a hurdle for those schools to quickly shift, right, their practices to the local foods incentive. And we've adapted we provide template materials for those contracts. And in recent years, we have provided materials that highlight local and allow schools to easily build local purchasing percentages into their food service management contracts. Another question was around funding. And so funding for the local foods incentive is not currently included in the governor's budget request. In past years, the General Assembly has chosen to fund this program through one-time appropriations. Let's see. Oh, and then, right, so thinking about the meal pattern, and that's just, you know, what does lunch look like on the tray for students? And so requirements to the meal pattern have changed with the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010. Now it's required that all grain items be whole rich. There needs to be different colors of vegetables served over the course of the week. Students have to take at least half a cup of fruits or vegetables with each meal. And there's also weekly sodium and calorie limits to those meals. School meals have changed a lot, you know, over the past 10 years, as I'm sure you all know. And you're always welcome to go to your local school to get lunch. It's typically about $5 for an adult meal at a school, roughly.
Connor, I'm sorry, can you just, because we had a couple of people coming in and things being passed around, can you just repeat again what the requirements are?
Yeah, so this is a broad overview, and there are, you know, some pretty detailed charts online. It's pretty specific, and I think Jim could also speak better to this actually than myself, but the requirements have changed a little bit since the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010. Now, all grain items need to be whole grain rich. There needs to be different colors of vegetables served over the course of the week. Students need to have at least half a cup of fruits or vegetables with each meal. And there are weekly sodium and calorie limits attached to those meals as well. So, you know, it's pretty, there's pretty specific regulations. And yeah, when Jim may want to talk more about that as well when he testifies.
Okay, good, thank you. Yeah, I think we're, you know, the committee is in thinking about universal school meals and extending that program, how much flexibility there is to encourage districts to incorporate local foods and where they might run into challenges because there are federal regulations that say, no, you can't do that, you know, either specifically or you have to do this, and that just makes it hard, you know, within a budget to do more.
Yeah, I would say generally. Oh, question.
Well, go ahead if you want to.
Generally speaking, yeah, there are those requirements in terms of what's on the tray, but it's not saying where it's coming from, right? And so I think the question really comes more down to that budget question, right? What's the price difference between something from California versus something from Vermont? And then also what current processing and production infrastructure do we have within Vermont to keep up with, a large demand spike? So I think those would be the larger questions. I think for the most part, what's required can be produced in Vermont. Yeah.
Representative O'Brien?
Yeah, Connor, just following up on the chair's question, what are the regulations or nutritional sort of guidelines for beverages?
Yeah, so milk needs to be served, right? And so that's fat-free or 1% milk. Water needs to be available at lunch. There are some allowances for juice during breakfast, but I also frankly don't want to get too far into the meal pattern specifics just because that's not what I specialize in. And so I think honestly, Jim, our food service director who's testifying, is a much better expert in this field than I am. Yeah.
Well, we'll let you get into what you are here to testify for.
Yeah, so thinking about the local foods incentive. So this is a grant program that encourages schools to buy Vermont local products. Only public supervisory union or school districts are eligible. So our independent schools are not eligible to apply for this. I'll talk about a school food authority, which is typically a supervisory union or school district, which could be just one school or made up of multiple schools. And so those are the entities that would be applying for this grant. We have it's set up so that there are 2 tracks, right? And so that during the baseline year, the first time that an SFA were to apply for this, it was a really simple application. And we're asking some questions to get schools thinking about and preparing for shifting their purchasing to buying more local. Every time that an SFA has applied for a baseline year application, we've approved it, right? So it's really there more to support schools. They do get a grant award of 15 cents per lunch served for that first year. And that's kind of some seed funding, right? To help them start buying more local and account for some of that cost difference. After that first year, after that baseline year, every year thereafter, we're looking at subsequent year grant applications. And that's where we're requiring at least 15% local food purchasing. And that's something that they need to track at the school and that we are confirming in the application once we receive those. And that's the bulk of the grant. Eventually, all schools that are interested in applying will apply for their baseline year and then be in subsequent years. And eventually, everyone's going to be submitting their tracking numbers to us that choose to participate. Let's see here. So just in terms of some of the efforts that the Agency of Education has done to promote this, we did run a webinar this past summer during our Summer Institute, which is kind of like our training period in advance of the year. So we ran a specific local foods incentive training during Summer Institute. That consisted of myself, Vermont Feed, as well as some food service directors talking about the requirements of the grant, what folks need to do to apply and be successful, but also getting those insights from some food service directors in terms of how they strategize about it, all right? Because the application's really easy, and we tried to really minimize the amount of work that we're asking for folks to do beyond the big hurdle of making their budgets work, right? And actually finding the local food and incorporating it into their meals. So that's really what we try to focus on when we're thinking about this. We've also put out a number of guidance resources, some memos, and just things really outlining the program. We're trying to be as transparent as possible, especially when it comes to reviewing subsequent year applications, right? We want to verify that the number that folks are reporting is indeed accurate, right? And consists solely of Vermont local products. And we don't want surprises when folks apply. So we've been pretty transparent in terms of what is that process going to look like? What are we going to be asking for in terms of documentation? And lastly, we've had a lot of different conversations with food service directors, with the food hubs, and our nonprofit partners when we've been designing this program, right? We've had to build this kind of from the ground up and just thinking about what qualifies, what metrics are we using, some of those guidance materials. Again, food service directors, they have a lot on their plate already. And so we want this to be as easy as possible while still maintaining the programmatic integrity of the grant. So thinking about, I'd say two things that we've noticed as we're receiving this is our first year receiving subsequent year applications. So this is kind of the first complete 2-year cycle, and we're starting to see some results from the grant program now. The first one is around tracking. And so we put out 2 different tracking templates that SFAs could use. We offered a method using their accounting codes that would just kind of be built into the accounting systems they already use. We also worked with Vermont Feed and some other partners to develop an Excel spreadsheet for, your more basic kind of external tracking, which takes a little bit more work, but also provides food service directors the flexibility of kind of crafting their own tool there. We saw both of those methods used, and then also a lot of, other homemade Excel spreadsheets that folks were using, which is fine by us as long as it allows us to clearly see what that purchasing looks like and kind of follow it backwards. The other big piece is around that Vermont local definition. I believe earlier you brought up the idea of, eggs just across the border in New Hampshire are available, but they don't count towards the local foods incentive. I think all counties except one in Vermont are border counties. And so having that Vermont local definition has, I think, been more difficult for some schools than others, right? In terms of making that purchasing work. What we have done is right in the bill, the Vermont local definition from the Agency of Agriculture is what we use to define local. That's a pretty specific definition. When starting the program, we found that an existing list of qualifying products wasn't there, right? The definition existed, but there's no real enforcement or verification method for that, which did prove to be a little bit of a stumbling block for us as we were designing this program, because we don't have the expertise at the Agency of Education to determine what's local and what's not local. The approach that we have taken is that we've asked producers to submit letters of attestation, just saying, yes, whatever this product is, it is local. This is the reason why it's local. Vermont Feed has been a huge partner in collecting a lot of those letters and creating an open database for schools to use. There's also the option for SFAs to reach out directly to producer. Maybe it's a really small farmer or something and collect that letter themselves. And so that's the current method we use. We don't dig further into that letter. Once the farmer says, yes, this is local, we're not going to question that letter. We accept that at face value. So the reason I'm bringing this background context in is thinking about expanding the definition of local to beyond Vermont. I just encourage you to think about, okay, and how would you verify that, right? And something like, right, a tomato is easy. If it's a tomato that was grown 20 miles away from Vermont, maybe 20 miles is your radius. That's easy to look up and say, yes, that farm fits within that radius. Once you get into more of like those, like, breads or salsa, any processed products where the definition is more nuanced, it gets really complicated to actually verify that. And when we leave the state of Vermont, that could be a hurdle there. Okay. And so lastly, just thinking about some of the results from this past year. So this year we had 23 school food authorities that were eligible for a subsequent year, were eligible to apply for a subsequent year grant. What that means is that last year they applied for that baseline year grant. Those were the first schools to apply. So out of those 23 that were eligible to apply, 15 applied. And of those 15, 6 hit that 15% threshold that was required to receive a grant award. 9 applied, but didn't hit that local purchasing threshold. And they knew that when they applied. The numbers, calculates the numbers right there. And so they figured, they've done the work, they've tracked, they might as well report it. We appreciate that because it gives us some more context in terms of where schools throughout the state are at with the program. There were 8 schools that could have applied but didn't. Presumably they either weren't tracking from the beginning or they just saw that their percentage didn't hit that threshold, and so they just figured they weren't going to plug those numbers into the report. And then we did have an additional 8 school food authorities that applied for the baseline year this year. So 8 new schools kind of joined the program for the first time. As previously mentioned, Wyndham Northeast Supervisory Union, based down in Bellows Falls, had the highest percentage with 27% local food purchasing. That's a really high percentage. And I think across the board with any of these schools that did hit that 15% threshold, it's safe to say that they've been buying local long before this grant program. It's hard to just pivot your program. You can't just pivot your program in 1 year and go from 0 to 15. And so this is kind of demonstrating these results. The schools that have been working at this for a few years now, at least. We do expect, as this program continues, as more schools kind of get on board, we're going to see more and more schools qualifying for that grant, total grant request to increase. So of the 15 schools that did apply for a subsequent year award, so that's both successful applicants and unsuccessful applicants, they all reported their local foods budget. And that total Vermont local budget is $775,000. And that's just the schools that applied and tracked, but that's a significant number that we expect to grow as well. Let's see here, just trying to see what other things I'd like to highlight. Yeah, oh, and then just, so going back, the total grant request, so of the $500,000 that was appropriated, we'll likely be awarding just under $340,000 in grants through the local foods incentive this year. We're still checking applications, and so that might change if some applications are deemed, unsuccessful. But while that is below the $500,000 that was appropriated, as we mentioned, I think it's going to take a couple of years for schools really to kind of transition to increasing their local. And I do expect us to continue to grow each year with more and more schools qualifying and increasing the amount they purchase. Yeah, at this point, it feels like the right number still at that $500,000 threshold. I think my last point is, as we're thinking about how to encourage more schools to apply, really, I think one of the biggest factors that's going to help is just having that really clean, verified number of this is your percent local, right? And that's really easy to talk about. And I think school boards and food service directors, they want to see higher numbers as well. And so as we see more and more schools increasing their local purchasing, I imagine there will be questions from schools that aren't participating in terms of, all the schools around us are buying 15, 20% local food. Why aren't we participating in this program? So I think a lot of program growth will likely come from that word of mouth and just community to community. And I think I'll leave it at that. And I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have.
Yeah, we've got a couple questions from the committee. Representative Cole?
Thank you, Connor. It's really helpful presentation. I'm curious how the local foods incentive grant program looks in a world where Universal Schools does not exist versus does exist. And if you could talk about the interplay between the two.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say probably one of the biggest impacts if there isn't universal meals is that there's less overall food budget for schools to work with, right? Schools benefit from economies of scale. So when they are serving more meals, which presumably they are during universal meals, they have more flexibility to order larger quantities, to get better prices, which kind of shrinks that gap between the price difference between local and non-local foods. I would say that's the biggest factor. I wouldn't expect, this program to take a massive hit if there wasn't universal meals. I think schools would still be trying to buy local. And because we only track and allow foods that are purchased for federally reimbursable meals to count. So that's school breakfast, school lunch, the fresh fruits and veggies program, if schools are running like the summer food service program. All of those programs that offer free or reduced priced meals to students is are the programs that we run. Point being is that we're hoping that the benefits are open to all students, right? So we're not including things like a la carte where kids have to pay out of pocket, which may not be accessible to all students. One other piece is that with universal meals, the total number of lunches served increases, and so that increases the grant awards as well. So schools would be seeing larger grant awards for the local foods incentive if there were continued universal meals.
Thank you.
Representative Rice?
Yeah, thanks, Connor. There's sort of two related questions. The first being, what, if any, is sort of system of support and help through that base year is being provided to schools to try to make sure that they are, as much as possible building toward that 15% threshold, if they're not there when they arrive in the base year. And then also sort of more broadly, what's going on to help with the capacity piece at the state level? And this is probably a question for Jim too. What's going on and what would be helpful? Like, is there a sort of, world where at the state level, there's meal planning and recipe development and contract help and those kinds of things, so that at the food service authority level, there are more pieces to just plug in and go and not have to do sort of that, is any of that happening? And if not, is that something that you perceive would be helpful to getting more schools on board?
Yeah, good questions. So the first question, thinking about, what support is available to baseline year applicants. So the way that the timing of the grant works is that schools are applying in December, and it's all looking back at the previous year, right? So the timelines get a little bit confusing, but if a school applied this past December for a baseline year grant, right? Next December in a year, when they apply for their subsequent year grant, they'll need to show their purchasing and tracking from the previous year. So schools need to already essentially start tracking and buying local, about 4 months before they even apply for their baseline year grant. And so it is very much like, it's a long timeline, right? It's a long on-ramp to really shift the purchasing, even just within the grant program itself. So with that caveat and understanding, once we have that list of schools that are in their baseline year grant, we'll do specific outreach, providing those resources to them. We encourage them to, the webinar was recorded, and so that training is available on their time. They don't have to meet whenever we offer that. And then I will say, Vermont Food, the food hubs have been huge resources in terms of being the folks more on the ground working one-on-one with those schools in providing those resources, both of the tools they need to be tracking, tracking for the grant, and then also finding those products that qualify. With that said, I also try to it's kind of a tightrope because food service directors are incredibly busy, and I'm just one person that wants their ear. And so I, try to not be too aggressive with how much I expect to see from them, right? And so I'm always available. I'm always sharing resources. We have a weekly email that goes out, and periodically when a new resource or guidance is updated, we'll include it there. But I try to be mindful of their time as well. In terms of some of those statewide resources, we do actually have there is a seasonal cycle menu, right? And so a cycle menu is that it's 6 weeks of lunches and recipes that you can then just kind of put on repeat. And so there was a toolkit developed by Vermont Food Service Directors in partnership with the Agency of Education. It's a really wonderful resource, has in-depth recipes for all of those different meals. And there's a fall, a winter, and a spring cycle menu that highlights Vermont local products. So that's available. We've been sharing that more and more. And actually this year we've seen a couple schools that do contract with food service management companies use that as their cycle menu that they're asking of their food service contracts. So we do offer some of those resources. There's the School Nutrition Association of Vermont which also, is not, part of the Agency of Education, but is another statewide organization that provides support to food service directors. And then lastly, thinking about those food service management contracts. So it's given that we have a relatively small group of schools that do use those contracts, and only a number of them are going out to contract each year going out to bid for a new contract. I'm able to work pretty closely. And so we have about a 1 hour onboarding meeting in the fall, talking about the process, highlighting some of the changes. Then I work with them pretty closely as they're developing those materials. I think in terms of bottlenecks, which I think is the heart of your question, I think it's really at the school level. Especially this year, we've just seen so much staff turnover with teachers, with school nutrition professionals, and in central offices, business offices. Folks are just really short-staffed and having a really hard time finding folks to fill open positions. And I think that's really the big limiting factor. And so, we can provide as many resources as we have and as we develop, but sometimes I worry that the bandwidth isn't always there to fully absorb what we're offering.
Connor, I think we might ask you to come back and pepper you with even more questions as we explore the bill that we've got in front of us and think about the request. And I'm also conscious that we have, a couple of things. The committee needs to stretch. And we've got a number of witnesses who still like to testify before noon. So thank you for being with us, and we'll be in touch. And if it's all right with everybody, very short break, just to stretch, use the restroom if you need to. Let's start again at 11:35 by that clock.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.